I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're standing in the middle of um, the most magnificent, just overflowing vault of treasure you've ever seen.
Right, like a literal gold mine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're talking about wealth that could fundamentally alter the course of human history, like fuel the global economy for generations, basically dictate who controls the next century.
The stakes are incredibly high.
They really are. So you can see the gold, or I guess in this case it's oil, gas, and uranium. It's all right there in front of you. But there's a massive catch.
There's always a catch.
Always. You are standing inside a fortress, and every single door leading to the outside world is just, well, it's jammed shut.
Completely sealed.
Yeah. And to actually get this wealth out into the world, to the markets, you have to negotiate with 4 deeply unpredictable, heavily armed bouncers standing at the gates.
And every single one of those bouncers has their own very specific, very aggressive agenda.
Right. So it's basically the ultimate geopolitical locked room mystery. You've got unimaginable wealth coupled with just absolute geographic isolation.
It really is. Unlocking that fortress is probably one of the most complex puzzles in international relations today.
And that geographic isolation is exactly what we're unpacking in today's deep dive into our sources. Because, if you're listening to this on a smartphone or driving a car, the raw materials required to power your life are increasingly tied to this specific region.
The Caspian Sea Basin in Central Asia.
Yes, exactly. And when I was looking through the briefing documents for today, the sheer scale of the numbers genuinely, it stopped me in my tracks.
The figures are staggering.
They really are. We're looking at a region that is the 3rd largest hydrocarbon resource on the entire planet.
Number 3 globally.
Yeah. It possesses 16% of global oil and an absolutely mind-boggling 53% of global gas.
Think about that for a second. More than half of the world's gas resources are concentrated in this one specific landlocked geographic pocket.
53%.
Right. Think about the massive geopolitical leverage that provides, and yet, because of the realities of geography and, well, modern history, physically getting to it.
And getting it out.
Exactly. Getting it out to global markets is arguably one of the biggest engineering and diplomatic headaches we have right now.
So our mission today is to untangle this intricate, incredibly high-stakes relationship between India and the 5 Central Asian republics.
Often referred to as the Chirar.
The Kirar, yeah. We're going to explore why this specific region has basically become the chessboard for a new great game involving India, China, Russia, and Western powers.
It's crowded out there.
Very crowded. And we'll look at how unlocking this landlocked fortress isn't just about money. It is absolutely vital for the stability of Eurasia and, by extension, the entire globe.
Definitely. And just so you know where we're coming from, our insights today are drawn from a comprehensive briefing on Indo-Central Asian republics relations.
And it covers everything.
Oh, yeah. It covers geopolitics, historical treaties, and these massive multimodal transport corridors that are, they're literally rewiring the map of the world.
They really are.
But what is so critical here is the linkage, right? You cannot understand the trade routes without understanding the terrorism threats.
Yeah.
And you cannot understand the pipelines without understanding the geography.
So let's just start right there with the geography. Let's build that mental framework. Before we get into the pipelines and the trade deals, who exactly are we talking about?
The Central Asian republics.
Right. 5 former Soviet republics. So we've got Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan.
Yep, those are the 5.
And together, we're looking at a population of about 82 million people.
Mm-hmm.
But the sources are really quick to point out that this isn't some monolithic bloc.
Not at all. It's incredibly diverse.
Right. There are over 100 different ethnic groups within this region, with the Uzbeks being the dominant demographic group.
And, understanding that internal diversity is important, but if we are really talking about geopolitics, their borders are the real story here.
It's external borders.
Exactly. These 5 nations are entirely 100% landlocked. And look at who they are surrounded by. You have China to the east, Russia to the north, Iran to the southwest, and Afghanistan and Pakistan to the south.
Which brings us back to that locked vault analogy, right? The landlocked curse, as the sources call it.
It is a curse.
And they use the Caspian Sea Basin as the prime example. Now, calling it a sea is a bit of a geographic trick.
Bit of a misnomer.
Because it's actually an inland body of water.
Mm-hmm.
The states that border it, the littoral states, include Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Iran, and Russia.
Right.
So you technically have a coastline, sure, but your coastline just leads to other countries that are also trapped, or to
Yeah.
direct geopolitical rivals.
Yeah, it creates this severe economic bottleneck. Let's break down the mechanism of why their economies have suffered so much despite sitting on all this wealth.
Let's do it.
To sell oil and gas globally, you basically have two options. You can use maritime shipping via international ports, or you use massive overland pipelines.
Right. Ships or pipes.
Exactly. And the Kiar have zero access to the open ocean. So they are entirely structurally dependent on pipelines, and pipelines have to cross borders.
In every direction they look, there's a roadblock. Like, let me pull up the specifics from the documents. Let's go through the map.
Let's do it.
So if they want to go west toward Europe, they hit the Caucasus, and the transit routes there have been chronically blocked by wars and regional instability.
It's a very rough neighborhood.
Very. But the much bigger western roadblock is actually Russia. The briefing explicitly mentions Russia's non-cooperation in the construction of oil pipelines westwards.
Yeah, active non-cooperation.
Which, I'll try to put myself in Russia's shoes here. Why would they actively block infrastructure that could enrich their immediate neighbors?
Well, because Russia's primary geopolitical weapon, and honestly its main economic engine, is its own energy export
Oh,
sector.
right. Gazprom and all that.
Exactly. Gazprom and Rosneft totally dominate the European market. If you are Moscow, the absolute last thing you want is a massive flood of cheap, accessible Central Asian oil and gas flowing directly into Europe through independent pipelines.
Because that would just crater their own prices.
It would undercut their pricing power entirely. And more importantly, it would severely diminish their political leverage over European capitals.
Wow, yeah, that makes total sense.
So historically, Russia has utilized its geographic position to basically force the Central Asian republics to route their resources through Russian infrastructure.
They want to be the gatekeeper.
Exactly. They act as the middleman, taking a cut of the profits and maintaining absolute control over the tap.
Okay, so going west is essentially a non-starter because Russia controls the valve. What about going south?
Well, going south means dealing with Afghanistan.
Ah,
And the sources highlight the Afghan civil war and just decades of instability as a massive deterrent there.
which makes intuitive sense, right?
Right.
You can't exactly get insurance on a multi-billion-dollar, highly combustible steel pipe running through a territory controlled by warring factions.
No underwriter is taking that risk.
Exactly. So west is out, south is out. What about southwest? Like through Iran? Looking at the map, Iran seems like the most logical, direct route to the open ocean, down to the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf.
Geographically, it is the most logical route. It's a straight shot, but financially, it's a total minefield.
Because of the sanctions.
Yes. The documents point out that U.S. sanctions against Iran have strongly discouraged international investors from putting any of their money into oil pipelines that run through Iranian territory.
And that's because of the way the global financial system is wired, right?
Precisely. If a European or Japanese energy conglomerate invests billions in an Iranian pipeline project, they risk being completely cut off from the U.S. financial system.
The secondary sanctions.
Right. They'd face massive secondary sanctions. So the international capital required for these mega projects just evaporates overnight. No one wants to touch it.
So you really see the compounding nature of the landlocked curse here. To recap from memory, north and west are squeezed by Russia and the Caucasus.
Yep.
South is physically dangerous due to Afghanistan.
Right.
And southwest is financially toxic due to U.S. sanctions.
It paints an incredibly claustrophobic picture, doesn't it?
It really does. You have the winning lottery ticket, but you are literally physically barred from reaching the bank to cash it.
That is exactly the situation.
And this dynamic is what sets off the Great Game. Now, the sources mention that the Great Game for oil in Central Asia initially pitted Western oil companies against Russia.
In the 90s.
Right.
Yeah.
But the briefing takes a massive pivot here, because the real long-term competition isn't the West versus Russia anymore. It is India versus China.
That right there is the defining contest for Eurasian hegemony in the 21st century.
India versus China.
Yes. And the dynamic is fascinating because it's not just India and China pushing their way into the region from the outside. The Central Asian republics themselves, along with Russia, are actively trying to pull India in.
Wait, okay, walk me through that. Why would Russia, who, as you literally just said, wants to monopolize this entire region, why would they invite India to the table?
It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. And why do the COFAR nations want another massive superpower in their backyard?
It essentially comes down to the fear of being swallowed whole by China.
Okay, let's break that down.
Let's look at the CAR nations first. They share massive, porous borders with China. They see China's immense economic gravity every single day.
Right, the Belt and Road stuff.
Exactly. If Beijing is the only player building your roads, buying your gas, and upgrading your telecommunications, well, you rapidly transition from an independent republic to a client state.
You just become a subsidiary of the Chinese economy.
Yes. You completely lose your strategic autonomy.
Because you become entirely dependent on a single buyer who can just dictate the price.
Right.
They hold all the cards.
Exactly. To prevent that, to keep some leverage, these nations desperately need a counterweight. They need another massive, energy-hungry economy to balance the scales.
Enter India.
Enter India. Having India there allows them to negotiate better terms with Beijing and maintain their own sovereignty. India just fits that profile perfectly. By bringing New Delhi into the fold, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and the others essentially create a multipolar dynamic in their own region.
Multipolarity, that's the key word there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I get why the CAR nations want India. But Russia shares this anxiety.
They really do. I mean, while Moscow and Beijing frequently align on the global stage, to push back against the United States, their local neighborhood is a totally different story.
Right, the frenemy dynamic.
Exactly. Remember, Central Asia was part of the Soviet Union. Russia still very much views it as its privileged sphere of influence.
Their backyard.
Yeah. But Moscow also recognizes that it simply cannot match China's financial firepower in the region anymore.
They just don't have the cash.
They don't. So, to prevent being completely eclipsed by Chinese influence in their own backyard, Russia quietly supports India's deeper involvement. They see India as a stabilizing, balancing force.
Okay, so literally everyone is essentially using India as a buffer against China's economic shadow.
Pretty much, yeah.
And India is more than happy to play that role, right? Because they desperately need what's inside that vault.
They need it to survive.
Which brings us to the core motivations driving New Delhi's strategy. The briefing outlines two massive overlapping pillars of Indian foreign policy in Central Asia. If you want to retain anything from this deep dive, remember these twin pillars: energy security and counterterrorism.
You really cannot separate those two things. The economic goals are completely 100% hostage to the security realities.
Let's unpack the energy piece first. India is a rapidly industrializing nation of 1.4 billion people.
Their energy demand is just skyrocketing.
Off the charts. So the sources outline a very specific three-pronged oil diplomacy that India is executing. Let's go through them.
Okay, prong one.
Number one, securing oil exploration contracts directly in Kazakhstan.
Right. Go straight to the source.
Number two, the TAPI gas pipeline. We'll get to that in a second. And number three, securing stakes in Russian hydrocarbon reserves.
It's basically a diversified portfolio approach, right? They are trying to secure resources at the source rather than just, buying them on the volatile open market.
But I really want to drill down into the TAPI pipeline because this project seems to just perfectly illustrate the collision between ambition and geography that we keep talking about.
Oh, TAPI is the perfect example.
So TAPI stands for Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India.
Yeah.
The plan is to pipe natural gas all the way from the massive reserves in Turkmenistan down through the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan, across the entirety of Pakistan, and finally into northern India.
Right.
I mean, just saying that out loud, it sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It is arguably one of the most fraught infrastructure projects on the entire planet. The concept itself is economically sound, right? You're connecting massive supply with massive demand. But the geography is just brutal.
Yeah, the sources note that work on TPI actually commenced back in 2015.
Over a decade ago.
Yeah, but it has been heavily delayed, primarily due to the situation in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, and tell me if I'm off base here, if this pipeline has been stalled for years because it has to run through an active war zone and then cross the territory of Pakistan, a country that has literally fought multiple wars with India. Aren't we just drawing lines on a map?
It looks good on paper, yeah.
Right. Structurally, how do you actually get the energy out if the pipe has to go through actively hostile territory?
You've basically identified the fatal flaw of relying solely on physical pipelines in a volatile region.
It's a pipe dream.
Pun intended, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's look at the actual mechanism of a pipeline. It is a fixed, highly vulnerable physical asset.
You can't just move it.
No, it cannot be rerouted in an emergency. So if Pakistan controls the physical valve on a pipeline that supplies, say, a huge percentage of India's natural gas, that hands Islamabad an unacceptable level of strategic leverage over New Delhi's economy.
Because in a crisis, they could literally just turn the lights off in northern India.
Exactly. They could just shut the valve.
Yeah. And that's just the Pakistani leg of the journey.
Right. The Afghan leg is even more complex. You have to physically lay steel pipes through rugged, mountainous terrain that is controlled by various tribal factions and, well, now, the Taliban.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Securing thousands of kilometers of pipe against sabotage or, extortion is nearly impossible without a robust, highly capable state security apparatus.
Which Afghanistan obviously lacks.
Exactly. This is why the project has languished for so long.
And it's not just pipelines either. The briefing mentions massive uranium deals, too. Let me find the exact numbers here. Okay, contracts for the supply of 2,000 tons of uranium from Uzbekistan and a staggering 5,000 tons from Kazakhstan.
Right, for their nuclear energy program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, uranium isn't natural gas. You don't pipe it. But moving 7,000 combined tons of radioactive material out of a landlocked region poses its own terrifying logistical horrors.
It's not a simple FedEx delivery.
No. You can't just throw that on a commercial cargo plane and hope for the best.
The logistics of nuclear fuel transport are, as you'd expect, incredibly strict. It requires specialized rail cars, heavy security escorts, specialized insurance, and just seamless customs clearances.
Right.
If the routes north through Russia are complicated by geopolitical tensions and the routes south are blocked by conflicts, physically taking delivery of that uranium requires India to establish entirely new, highly secure transit corridors.
Which perfectly illustrates your earlier point.
Yeah.
The economic pipelines, whether we're talking gas or uranium, are totally hostage to the security situation.
Yes.
You simply cannot have trade without stability. And that reality violently forces us into the second pillar of India's strategy, counterterrorism.
This is where the historical context in the briefing is absolutely vital to understand.
Let's dig into it.
The documents detail what they call the Islamic factor in Central Asia. When these 5 republics gained independence following the collapse of the Soviet Union back in 1991, it coincided perfectly with the global resurgence of political Islam.
But the sources make a really crucial distinction here that we shouldn't gloss over. They point out that these Central Asian republics are, at their core, secular nations.
Very much so. Their political elites, their bureaucracies, their military and legal frameworks, all of it was entirely forged within the Soviet system.
And the Soviets heavily suppressed organized religion.
Exactly. They aggressively suppressed it. So
Yeah.
these are not states that naturally lean toward theocratic governance at all.
But geography doesn't care about your secular constitution, does it?
It really doesn't.
Because they're geographically anchored right next to the Afghan-Pakistan border, what the sources explicitly call the hub of international terrorism.
Yes.
And this wasn't just a theoretical threat for these newly independent states. The briefing highlights a very specific, incredibly traumatic trigger event, the February 1999 bomb blasts in Tashkent.
The capital of Uzbekistan. We really need to pause on 1999 because that was the moment the geopolitical tectonic plates shifted for this entire region.
Right, because up until that point, you could kind of imagine the leaders in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan viewing the chaos down in Afghanistan as a tragic but distant neighbor's problem.
Like a fire in the house down the street.
Exactly.
But in February 1999, the fire reached their own house. 6 massive car bombs detonated across Tashkent in a highly coordinated attack.
Just brutal.
They targeted key government buildings, including the headquarters of the National Bank, and crucially, the very building where the president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, was scheduled to be speaking.
Wow. So an attempted decapitation of the state.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah.
Dozens were killed, hundreds were injured.
And the sources explicitly identified Pakistan-backed fundamentalists as the perpetrators, right?
Yeah.
Specifically the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan.
Yes. And for the secular Soviet-trained leaders of the FDR, this was a terrifying wake-up call.
It made it real.
Very real. The radicalism brewing in the AfPak region wasn't contained at all. It was actively trying to overthrow their governments and establish Islamic caliphates in Central Asia.
So the violence had basically breached the vault.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And the response was rapid.
Mm.
The documents show that just over a year later, on April 24th, 2000, 4 of these republics, so that's Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, they convened in Tashkent to sign a major security pact.
The Tashkent Pact, yeah.
And the stated objective, to jointly combat terrorism, political and religious extremism, and transnational organized crime.
Notice the institutional reaction there, right? They immediately realized they couldn't handle this individually.
They needed backup.
And this shared trauma, this shared threat perception, is the actual bedrock of their strategic alignment with India.
Because if you look at India in 1999, that's the exact same time India is dealing with the Kargil War.
Exactly.
And they are facing immense cross-border terrorism from the exact same Pakistani-backed terror networks.
Precisely. India and the Central Asian states suddenly found themselves facing the exact same asymmetrical threat, originating from the exact same geographic hub.
A common enemy.
Yes. And the briefing notes that faced with this common enemy, India and the CAR decided to formally institutionalize their intelligence sharing.
Okay, so how does that actually work in practice? We always hear the phrase intelligence sharing thrown around on the news, but what does that mean on the ground for these specific countries?
Well, it means moving way beyond just summit handshakes and photo ops.
Real operational stuff.
Right. It involves Indian intelligence agencies, like RAW, actively comparing notes with the intelligence services of Uzbekistan or Tajikistan.
Sharing the raw data.
Exactly. They collaborate on tracking the physical locations of terrorist training camps inside Afghanistan. They map out the cross-border networking, like how insurgents are physically moving weapons and personnel across the borders.
Wow.
And crucially, they follow the money. They track the terror financing networks that utilize informal hawala systems to fund these operations.
So this shared security anxiety creates a remarkably tight diplomatic bond.
Unbreakable, almost.
And the sources highlight a fact that I found really surprising, actually. They note that all 5 SICAR countries explicitly support India's position on Kashmir.
That is a massive detail.
It is, because if you follow international diplomacy even a little bit, Kashmir is one of the most sensitive, radioactive territorial disputes on the planet.
Absolutely.
For 5 Islamic majority, albeit secular nations, to openly back India's stance over Pakistan's stance, that is a massive indicator of where their strategic loyalties actually lie.
It really is. It proves that they view India not just as, a wealthy market to buy their gas, but as an indispensable security guarantor in a deeply volatile neighborhood.
They trust them.
They trust New Delhi far, far more than they trust Islamabad.
And you see this alignment formalized at the very highest levels, too. The documents mention the December 2021 summit, discussions between India and the Kashgar heads of state.
Right after Kabul fell.
Exactly. The central focus of those talks wasn't trade tariffs or gas prices. It was shared concerns regarding the Taliban's complete takeover of Afghanistan just a few months prior.
You have to connect the dots here, right? The U.S. withdraws, the Afghan government completely collapses, and the Taliban takes over in August 2021.
Chaos.
Complete chaos. And this immediately supercharges the security threat to the Central Asian republics to the north and to India to the south.
Because the buffer is gone.
The buffer is totally gone. And circling back to our earlier point about the TPI pipeline, this event effectively drives a stake through the heart of any immediate hope for overland energy transit.
Right.
The security environment dictates the economic reality. You can't build a pipeline through a country controlled by the Taliban.
So let's just summarize the dilemma here to make sure we've got the retention locked in.
Yeah.
India desperately needs the energy and the 7,000 tons of uranium.
Yes.
The CAR desperately needs the Indian market to avoid being totally absorbed by China.
Correct.
But the pipelines through Afghanistan are a geopolitical pipe dream, and Pakistan is a hostile blocker, preventing any direct overland road access.
It's a complete stalemate.
Exactly. So if India can't go through the front door, and they can't go through the side door, they have to invent a completely new physical way to reach Central Asia.
They have to engineer a massive geopolitical bypass surgery.
Bypass surgery, yes. And that brings us to the grand connectivity master plans. We are talking about Chabahar, Ashgabat, and the INSTC.
The big 3.
This is where the sheer scale of the engineering and diplomatic ambition really comes into focus. Let's map this out.
Okay, let's start with the absolute anchor point of this whole bypass strategy.
The port.
Yes, Chabahar Port in Iran, specifically India's development of the Shahid Bashti terminal there.
Because if you pull up a map right now, you will immediately see why this port is the linchpin. Chabahar is located on the southeastern coast of Iran, right on the edge of the Gulf of Oman and the Indian Ocean.
It's perfectly positioned.
It is. For India, this is the ultimate hack to bypass Pakistan. You literally just load your cargo onto a ship in Mumbai or Gujarat, sail it straight across the Arabian Sea, and unload it in Chabahar.
Pakistan is completely removed from the logistical equation.
Right. They don't even have to look at Pakistan.
But, and this is but a port is just a parking lot for ships if you can't actually move the goods inland.
Good point.
The documents detail India's massive infrastructural commitment beyond the port itself, because they plan to build a 610-kilometer north-south railway line starting from Chabahar.
610 kilometers.
Right. Running straight up the eastern edge of Iran to the city of Zahedan, which is right near the Afghan and Pakistani borders.
And India had actually already been laying the groundwork inside Afghanistan to connect to this system, hadn't they?
They had, yeah.
The sources mentioned the Zaranj de Ram highway. India literally built this 215-kilometer highway inside southwestern Afghanistan to connect the Afghan ring road directly to the Iranian border.
It was a massive project.
Because the idea was to create a seamless route, right?
Right.
From the Iranian port up to the Afghan border and deep into Central Asia.
That was the dream. But again, the security dynamic shifts.
The Taliban again.
Right. The Taliban's return to power in 2021 severely compromises that specific Afghan overland route. You just can't rely on a highway running through a Taliban-controlled province to transport strategic minerals.
You get robbed blind.
Or worse, which suddenly makes the Iranian rail route, the one bypassing Afghanistan entirely and pushing straight up through Iran into Turkmenistan, even more critical.
So India is physically building the roads and the ports. That's the concrete and steel part.
Yes.
But physical infrastructure requires bureaucratic infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
You can have the fastest train in the world, but if it gets stopped at every single border for 3 weeks of customs inspections, the trade route is useless.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Exactly.
Sure.
Which leads us to the Ashgabat Agreement. Let's dig into that treaty.
This is a really fascinating piece of diplomatic architecture. And honestly, looking at its timeline shows how these alliances slowly crystallize over time.
It wasn't overnight.
No. The agreement was first initiated way back in 2011 by Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Oman, and Qatar.
That's a bit of an eclectic initial grouping. Oman and Qatar.
It was, yeah. And Qatar actually withdrew a couple of years later in 2013. But the core Eurasian nations kept pushing it forward. In 2016, Kazakhstan and Pakistan joined the pact.
Okay.
And then, crucially for our discussion, India officially joined the grouping in 2018.
So I'm looking at the objective of the Ashgabat Agreement in the briefing, and it's explicitly designed to synchronize Eurasian transport.
Right.
It's all about standardizing the rules of the road.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanism of harmonization, how it actually functions.
Okay.
When you are moving a shipping container from Mumbai all the way to Tashkent, it crosses multiple sovereign borders.
Right.
And historically, each country has its own tariff structures, its own customs documentation, its own physical weight limits for rail cars.
The total bureaucratic nightmare.
Complete nightmare. The Ashgabat Agreement attempts to create a unified transit protocol, a single set of paperwork. It drastically reduces that friction.
And there's a physical component to it as well, not just paperwork. The sources highlight the Iran-Turkmenistan-Kazakhstan railway line, the ITK line, which opened in December 2014.
Right, so by joining this Central Asian-led transport mechanism, India ensures that its billion-dollar investments down south in the Chabahar Port aren't isolated.
They're plugging into an existing network.
Exactly. They plug directly into a recognized, standardized international transit corridor. The briefing specifically notes that the multipurpose terminal at Chabahar just couldn't be fully realized unless India joined a mechanism exactly like Ashgabat.
But Ashgabat is just regional. There is a much, much bigger master plan at play here.
The big one.
The INSTC, the International North-South Transport Corridor.
Yeah.
If Chabahar is the bypass surgery, the INSTC is an entirely new circulatory system for global trade.
The scale of the INSTC is genuinely hard to wrap your head around.
It's massive.
And it was first proposed way back in the year 2000 by Russia, India, and Iran.
Wait, the year 2000? They've been working on this for over 2 decades.
Geopolitics is notoriously slow, especially when it involves coordinating the bureaucracies of 13 different nations.
Fair point.
So the INSTC is a 7,200-kilometer multimodal network. And multimodal just meaning it integrates sea freight, rail lines, and road networks into one single continuous supply chain.
Let's actually list the member countries, because it really paints a picture of this massive, decidedly non-Western geopolitical bloc.
It's a huge shift in gravity.
Right. We've got India, Iran, Russia, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Oman, Syria, and Ukraine.
Now, Obviously, the inclusion of Ukraine and Syria highlights how geopolitical events like wars can disrupt these massive corridors.
Right, some of those links are definitely broken right now.
Yeah. But the core spine of the route, that north-south axis, remains the absolute focus.
So let's trace that core spine. How does a crate of goods, say advanced Indian pharmaceuticals, or on the return trip, Kazakh titanium, actually move from India to Europe without using the traditional Suez Canal route?
Okay, it's a multi-step process. Step 1. The goods are loaded onto a ship in Mumbai, India. They sail across the Arabian Sea to an Iranian port. Historically, that was Bandar Abbas, but it's increasingly moving to Chabahar.
Okay, that's step 1, sea transit.
Step 2. The cargo is offloaded onto trucks or trains, and it travels north, entirely traversing the Iranian landmass all the way up to Bandar Anzali, which is an Iranian port right on the southern coast of the Caspian Sea.
There's the Caspian again, the locked vault.
Exactly, we're back at the vault. Step 3. At Bandar Anzali, the containers are loaded back onto ships. These ships cross the inland Caspian Sea northwards to Astrakhan, which is a major port in the Russian Federation.
Okay, crossing the lake.
And finally, step 4. At Astrakhan, the goods are placed onto the Russian railway network, moving further into Western Russia and, theoretically at least, onward into European markets.
Okay, so Mumbai to Iran by sea, up Iran by land, across the Caspian by sea, and through Russia by rail. 7,200 kilometers.
It's a journey.
It is. So why go through all this multimodal effort? Why load and unload a container 4 times? Why not just put it on a massive container ship and send it through the Suez Canal, like everyone else has done for a century?
Because the math is just undeniably compelling.
What's the math?
The sources cite a study by the Federation of Freight Forwarders Associations in India. They found that the INSTC route is 30% cheaper and 40% shorter than the traditional maritime route via the Suez Canal.
30% cheaper. Wow. I mean, in the world of global logistics, where profit margins are razor thin, a 30% reduction in freight costs is literally revolutionary.
It changes everything, and the time savings are equally vital. It cuts transit times down from roughly 40 to 60 days via the Suez to less than a month.
And the incredible thing is, this isn't just theoretical on a whiteboard anymore. For 20 years, it was mostly paperwork. But the briefing highlights a major milestone, the July 2022 test run.
Right, that was the proof of concept.
Let's talk about that.
In July 2022, an India-bound cargo shipment was sent all the way from Russia using the INSTC framework. It reached the Sarkis railway station in Iran on July 13th.
Okay.
From there, it traveled by road down to the Bandar Abbas port and was shipped across the Arabian Sea to Nawab Sheva, the Jawaharlal Nehru port in Navi Mumbai.
And how long did it take?
The entire 7,200-kilometer journey took just 24 days.
24 days. That is the absolute proof of concept right there. It worked.
It absolutely works.
But I'm reading the fine print in the sources here, and it seems there are still a few physical gaps in the chain that need fixing.
There's one big one.
Right. The sources note a critical missing link. A 165-kilometer stretch of railway inside Iran that would directly connect the Iranian and Azerbaijani railway networks.
Yes, the Rasht-Dastar railway line. It's a relatively small gap geographically, just 165 kilometers, but it is a major bottleneck logistically.
Because right now they have to switch to trucks, right?
Exactly. If that rail link is finished, you wouldn't necessarily have to load the cargo onto ships to cross the Caspian Sea anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you could run trains straight from southern Iran, up through Azerbaijan, and directly into the Russian rail network without ever touching the water.
And the documents state that in January 2023, Russia and Iran formally agreed to launch the construction of that exact missing link.
Finally.
Right. And Russia is actually providing the funding, and Russian railways offered to complete the construction themselves.
Which really demonstrates how aggressively Moscow's calculus has shifted recently.
Because of Ukraine?
Yes. Before the war in Ukraine and the resulting Western sanctions, Russia might have, slow-walked this southern corridor to protect their European dominance.
Right, like we talked about earlier.
But now, completely cut off from European markets, Russia desperately needs this north-south route to access India and the Middle East just as much as India needs it to reach Central Asia.
They need each other now more than ever.
Exactly. The incentives are finally perfectly aligned.
So if we look at the economic implications of this bypass surgery, it's not just about moving finished consumer goods or getting around a clogged Suez Canal.
No, it's way deeper than that.
The briefing makes it clear that this is fundamentally about resource extraction for India's massive industrial base.
To raw materials.
Right, we talked about the energy and the 7,000 tons of uranium.
Yeah.
But the Central Asian region also houses massive, massive deposits of copper, titanium, ferroalloys, yellow phosphorus, iron ore, zinc, coking coal, and abundant deposits of fertilizer inputs like potash.
I mean, these aren't just commodities to trade. These are the critical foundational building blocks of modern manufacturing and agriculture.
You literally can't build a modern economy without them.
You can't. And the text explicitly states that without direct, secure transport access, India simply cannot procure the Central Asian riches required for its own manufacturing economy.
Which hurts their grand strategy.
Absolutely. If India wants to achieve its stated policy goals of strategic autonomy, initiatives like Atmanirbhar Bharat or a self-reliant India, it cannot be dependent on supply chains that are ultimately controlled by geopolitical rivals.
Right, they need direct access.
Mhm.
And the Central Asian states are eager to sell, aren't they?
Oh, they are highly motivated.
The sources note that Kazakhstan alone wants to increase its non-oil exports by 50% by the year 2025.
50% is a massive jump.
It is. So they have the supply, India has the demand, and the INSTC is the physical bridge connecting them.
And, we really shouldn't overlook a critical humanitarian aspect that's mentioned in the text here, too.
Oh, right, with Afghanistan.
Yeah, this isn't just about titanium and oil. India can and has used the Chabahar route to bypass Pakistan in order to provide thousands of tons of humanitarian wheat assistance directly to the Afghan people.
Which they couldn't do before.
Right. The corridor provides a level of operational flexibility and, frankly, regional projection that India has lacked for decades.
Okay, so India, Russia, and Iran have spent 20 years painstakingly laying tracks, dredging ports, and harmonizing customs documents.
It's been a grind.
A huge grind. But while they've been methodically building this system, another superpower hasn't just been waiting around.
No, they've been busy.
They've been aggressively, radically rewriting the rules on the ground. We have to talk about China.
The dragon in the room. This is the primary catalyst for India's recent urgency.
The sources outline China's playbook in the region, and it is overwhelmingly massive. It's the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
The big one.
Right. China is attempting to harness the maximum mineral and hydrocarbon wealth of the Central Asian region while simultaneously wiring those nations directly into the Chinese consumer market.
It's basically a dual-pronged strategy, right? You extract the raw materials to feed the Chinese industrial engine.
And then you dump the finished manufactured goods back into the Central Asian markets.
Exactly. You effectively capture their economies from both ends. It's incredibly effective.
But the briefing highlights that China's ambition goes far beyond just economics and building highways. They are rapidly expanding their military footprint in Central Asia as well.
This is the part that makes everyone nervous.
Yeah. The documents note their focus on arms sales to the CAR nations. And notably, they are conducting bilateral counterterrorism initiatives outside of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO.
Okay, that is a critical nuance. We should unpack that.
Please do. Why does doing it outside the SCO matter so much?
Well, the SCO is a multilateral Eurasian political, economic, and security organization, right? And it's dominated jointly by China and Russia.
Okay.
Historically, security matters in Central Asia were handled entirely under the SCO umbrella. That allowed Russia to maintain a level of parity and, frankly, oversight over what China was doing militarily in the region.
Keeping them in check.
Right. But by stepping outside the SCO to forge direct bilateral military ties with countries like Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, China is sending a very clear signal.
That they don't need Russia's permission anymore.
Exactly. They are signaling that they no longer feel the need to defer to Moscow on regional security in Central Asia.
Wow. And it extends deep into soft power, too. The documents mention that China is actively promoting Chinese language instruction in Central Asian countries to eliminate linguistic barriers.
Language is power.
It is. They're opening Confucius Institutes. They're offering massive scholarships for Central Asian students to go study in Beijing.
They are actively engineering a cultural and linguistic pivot away from Russian and toward Mandarin.
Which leads the sources to a pretty stark assessment, doesn't it?
Very stark. The text concludes that China's military and economic influence in the region will inevitably continue to compete with and likely weaken Russian influence in the long term.
Which is just a seismic geopolitical shift. I mean, for 2 centuries, this was Russia's undisputed backyard. And now Beijing is quietly buying the deed to the house.
And this brings us right back to why the Central Asian republics are so desperate for India's presence.
The balancing act.
Right. They see the BRI debt traps. They see the Chinese military outposts springing up. They hear their children learning Mandarin in school. They recognize the acute existential risk of being completely absorbed into China's sphere of influence.
But looking at all of this, I really have to ask, is India simply too late to the party?
It's a fair question.
I mean, if China is already teaching their language in schools, has already built thousands of kilometers of roads under the BRI, and is actively selling advanced weaponry to these governments, are the Indians just trying to play catch-up with, summit meetings and a 20-year-old rail project that still has missing links?
That is the exact anxiety that triggered what the briefing refers to as India's diplomatic revival. Because, honestly, for a long time, India was asleep at the wheel.
They missed the boat initially.
They really did.
Mm.
The text highlights a truly stunning historical fact. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to all 5 Central Asian republics in 2015 was the first visit by an Indian prime minister to all 5 nations since Jawaharlal Nehru visited in 1955.
That is a 60-year gap.
6 decades.
60 years of virtually ignoring the most resource-rich region on the continent, right, while China was aggressively laying the groundwork.
Exactly. A 60-year strategic slumber. That 2015 visit signaled that New Delhi was finally abruptly waking up. It provided a massive impetus to trade, energy security, and connectivity talks.
But why wake up in 2015 specifically? What triggered the alarm bells then? The briefing outlines 3 specific geopolitical developments that dramatically changed the stakes for India, forcing them to rapidly accelerate their engagement.
Let's run through those 3 triggers just to lock them in.
Okay, trigger number 1.
First, as we just discussed, the sheer undeniable scale of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The volume of Chinese capital flowing into the region was permanently altering the strategic balance, and India realized it can no longer just sit on the sidelines and watch.
Right. Trigger number 2.
Second, the rapidly degrading security environment. The looming withdrawal of U.S. forces, which eventually happened, and the subsequent Taliban takeover in Afghanistan created massive security voids.
The buffer zone was collapsing.
Yes. The buffer zone between Central Asian radicalism and Indian territory was disintegrating.
And trigger number 3.
Third, and this is crucial, the sources note a deeply concerning trend for New Delhi. Central Asian countries had begun establishing closer diplomatic and economic ties with Pakistan.
Which is the absolute worst-case scenario for India, right?
The ultimate nightmare.
If Pakistan manages to integrate itself deeply with the KRR economies, perhaps facilitated by, Chinese BRI investments linking the region to Pakistani ports like Gwadar, India, risks being permanently boxed out of Eurasia.
Permanently isolated. So, faced with these 3 catalysts, India had to move. Now, to be clear, India's strategy isn't to try and match China dollar for dollar in infrastructure spending.
They can't afford to do that.
No, the Indian economy simply cannot match the raw capital deployment of the Chinese state apparatus. It's a losing game. Instead, India's strategy is to offer a balanced alternative.
The briefing states that India wants to increase its relevance as a reliable economic partner whose security concerns need to be considered. How does that actually differ from the Chinese pitch?
Well, the Chinese pitch is heavily transactional and often very extractive, right? Like, we will build your road, but we own the debt and we get the mining rights.
Right.
India is attempting to offer a partnership based on shared democratic values, where applicable mutual security against common terror threats and technological cooperation that actually empowers the local population rather than just extracting their resources.
And this need for a structured, institutionalized pushback, a way to permanently anchor India in the region so they never ever have another 60-year gap in communication that culminated in a historic diplomatic milestone.
If the 2015 visit was the wake-up call, the events of 2022 were the installation of a brand new diplomatic operating system.
Yes. On January 27, 2022, India and the 5 Central Asia republics held their first ever joint summit.
The India-Central Asia Summit.
Right. It was held virtually, and it marked exactly 30 years since India established diplomatic ties with the region following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And the most critical outcome of the summit wasn't, a specific trade deal for widgets. It was the mechanism it created. They agreed to establish a summit-level meeting every 2 years, a biennial summit.
It's about forcing engagement, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because diplomacy requires constant bureaucratic maintenance. A mandatory summit every 2 years forces the foreign ministries of all 6 nations to constantly prepare agendas, negotiate deliverables, and just maintain contact.
Precisely. You build the plumbing so the water can flow. And the key outcomes of this summit, which were formally enshrined in the Delhi Declaration, are entirely focused on building that institutional framework.
Let's run through the specifics of the Delhi Declaration because it essentially lays out the exact roadmap for the next 3 decades of relations.
Okay, step one.
First, they agreed to set up an actual, physical India Central Asia Secretariat located in New Delhi.
Which is huge.
Yeah. This means having dedicated, full-time staff from all these nations working every day on this specific relationship.
Institutional memory. They also agreed to regular scheduled meetings across multiple very specific levels of government. So not just heads of state waving at cameras, but foreign ministers, trade ministers, culture ministers, and crucially, secretaries of the Security Council.
Again, cementing that critical linkage between trade and security.
Always linked.
The documents also mention the creation of specific joint working groups at the senior official level. They set up one group focused entirely on Afghanistan and another focused specifically on the operational use of the Chabahar Port.
Getting into the weeds of actually making these things work. And in a very significant move, they proposed joint counterterrorism exercises between India and Central Asian countries for those who indicate interest.
That is a massive step. It's moving from just sharing intelligence files in a dark back room to actual joint operational readiness.
Boots on the ground training.
Right. Soldiers from India and the Kara are physically training together to combat the threats emanating from the AFPAC region.
The sources also break down how Prime Minister Modi during this summit highlighted distinct bilateral partnerships with each of the individual republics. It shows a very tailored approach.
Recognizing that they aren't a monolith.
Exactly. Recognizing that what Kazakhstan needs is very, very different from what Tajikistan needs.
Let's quickly review those tailored pitches just to see how India is playing the board.
Sure.
He highlighted the partnership with Kazakhstan specifically on energy security, which makes perfect sense given the vast oil reserves and the 5,000 tons of uranium we discussed earlier.
Right. Then with Kyrgyzstan, the focus was heavily on education and high-altitude research, which plays directly to their specific geographic and demographic realities.
And with Tajikistan, the primary pillar was security.
Makes sense.
Tajikistan shares a long, incredibly complex, and porous border with Afghanistan. They're the literal frontline state against the terrorism threats, making them India's most critical security partner in the region.
And finally, with Turkmenistan, the focus was on regional connectivity via the Ashgabat Agreement, tying perfectly into the transit corridor strategies to finally unlock their massive gas reserves.
Now, on the economic integration front, the Delhi Declaration yielded some major consensus. All the CAR countries explicitly supported India's proposal to formally include the Chabahar Port within the framework of the INSTC.
That's a huge integration step. Furthermore, Turkmenistan actually proposed including their own major Caspian port, the Turkmenbashi port, into the INSTC framework as well.
So what we are seeing in real time is the active weaving together of all these previously separate, isolated projects, Chabahar, Ashgabat, INSTC, into one massive, unified logistical network.
The bypass surgery is fully operational.
It is. India even went a step further, formally welcoming the interests of the Central Asian countries to utilize the Shahid Beheshti terminal at Chabahar for their own independent trade with India and other external global markets.
Think about what that means. It is India explicitly handing them the keys to the bypass road. They're saying, hey, we built the route around Pakistan and Russia. Use it to sell your goods to the rest of the world.
But physical infrastructure, the ports and rails, is only half the battle, right?
You need the legal framework.
Exactly. You need the legal and economic frameworks to make the movement of those goods actually profitable. The briefing outlines 2 major trade agreements currently being negotiated to lubricate this whole system.
Let's talk about the FTAs.
First, India is actively engaged in free trade agreement talks with the Eurasian Economic Union, or the EAEU.
We should probably define the EAEU for context here.
Yeah, please do.
The documents note it consists of Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia, with Armenia likely to join. It is a massive single market designed somewhat like the European Union, but for post-Soviet states.
So if India successfully negotiates a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the EAEU, it would dramatically expand its economic, trade, and investment opportunities across that whole bloc.
Massive.
And as the text states, it would be much, much easier to access these markets through the INSTC, drastically boosting the competitiveness of India's exports.
And notably, the sources point out that Russia has formally backed India's initiatives to improve its presence here. Again, Moscow vastly prefers Indian economic integration over total Chinese economic dominance.
The second major trade initiative is a preferential trade agreement, or PTA, specifically with Uzbekistan.
Right.
India and Uzbekistan have totally fast-tracked these bilateral talks. An India-Uzbekistan PTA would speed up linkage to the entire landlocked region, and, as the sources explicitly mention, it would create secondary access to markets in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well.
These agreements are so vital because they lower tariffs, they harmonize regulations, and they essentially remove all that bureaucratic friction that historically made overland trade too expensive to bother with.
They make the math work.
Exactly. But there is one final, truly fascinating piece of the economic puzzle mentioned in the briefing, and it highlights a unique advantage that India brings to the table.
Something China doesn't have.
A capability that China really doesn't offer in the exact same way.
And this goes way beyond digging minerals out of the ground. We are talking about the IT sector.
Yes. Information technology. The documents explicitly state that there is huge scope for these Central Asian countries to benefit from India's expertise in IT and IT-enabled services.
Let's unpack the mechanism of this, because I actually think it's brilliant. As the economies of Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan try to modernize, as they attempt to digitize their banking sectors or modernize their logistics networks or build out e-governance platforms, they desperately need high-level digital infrastructure.
And India is an undisputed global superpower in IT services. By offering to basically build out the digital architecture of Central Asia, India provides a massive non-extractive value proposition.
They aren't just taking stuff.
No, they aren't just there to take oil, they are there to help build the 21st century economy for these nations.
But wait, I have a massive question about this, logistically speaking. How does that actually work in practice?
What do you mean?
Well, the Indian IT sector operates almost entirely in English, right?
Yes.
But the Central Asian bureaucracies and banking systems operate in Russian or local Turkic and Persian languages. So how does an IT firm sitting in Bangalore build a complex e-governance system for a ministry in Tashkent without just massive linguistic friction? Especially when, as we said, China is actively teaching Mandarin in these countries.
That is the exact hurdle they have to overcome, and it's a big one. The mechanism to bridge that gap involves India establishing specific capacity-building institutions right there on the ground.
Oh, interesting.
India isn't just selling box software, they are physically setting up IT centers of excellence within the CAR nations.
Teaching them to fish.
Exactly. They are training a whole new generation of Central Asian engineers in English medium IT protocols, effectively creating a bilingual technical working class. Furthermore, modern software architecture allows Indian developers to build the highly robust backend systems while utilizing localized translation layers for the actual user interface. It is definitely a heavier lift than operating in an Anglophone country, but the strategic payoff is massive.
Wiring the Central Asian digital economy to Indian standards.
Yes, wiring them to Indian standards rather than Chinese tech stacks, it is considered entirely worth the effort.
It perfectly encapsulates India's overarching strategy here, doesn't it? Present a balanced, multifaceted alternative. Offer joint security cooperation to stabilize the region. Build a physical bypass route to the ocean via Chabahar. Negotiate free trade access to lower costs. And provide high-end, modernizing technological services.
It's comprehensive.
All to ensure that the region doesn't just devolve into a monolithic bloc controlled by a single neighbor.
It is an incredibly complex, multidimensional chess game being played across thousands of kilometers of very tough terrain.
So as we zoom out and wrap this up, let's just recap the massive ground we've covered in this deep dive.
We started by looking at the fundamental geographic reality of the 5 former Soviet republics: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan.
Right, they're sitting on a literal ocean of hydrocarbon wealth, including 53% of global gas.
But they suffer from the paralyzing curse of being entirely landlocked, surrounded by rivals and conflict zones.
Then we looked at how India's entry into this great game is driven by 2 inextricably linked pillars. Number 1, a desperate hunger for energy security to fuel its industrial rise, which we saw in the uranium deals and the stalled TPI pipeline.
And number two, a critical existential need for counterterrorism cooperation to combat the fundamentalist threats emanating from the Afghan-Pakistan hub.
That's right, starkly highlighted by the 1999 Tashkent bombings.
We trace the staggering engineering and diplomatic ambition of the connectivity master plans, the strategic development of Chabahar Port in Iran to entirely bypass Pakistan,
The harmonization of bureaucratic transit rules through the Ashgabat Agreement.
and of course the activation of the 7,200-kilometer international north-south transport corridor, a system scientifically designed to cut transit costs by 30% and time by 40%.
We analyzed the immense pressure created by China's sprawling Belt and Road Initiative and how shifting geopolitical sands, like the Taliban's return to power-forced India to finally wake from a 60-year diplomatic slumber.
And finally, we explored the institutionalization of this complex relationship through the Delhi Declaration of 2022.
Which laid down the diplomatic plumbing, the Secretariat's working groups and joint exercises for the next 3 decades of cooperation, bolstered by incoming free trade agreements and deep IT integration.
It truly is an incredible journey, going from isolated, landlocked Soviet republics to the absolute beating heart of a new Eurasian trade network.
It really is. But as we wrap up this deep dive into our sources, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought.
Something to think about.
Yeah, something to mull over the next time you look at a map of the world.
We've spent the last hour talking extensively about the monumental effort required to avoid traditional maritime routes.
Right. We look at a map today, and we inherently assume the oceans are the permanent, unchangeable highways of global power.
The Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the Panama Canal.
Exactly. But as global warming alters maritime environments, and more importantly, as those traditional sea lanes face increasing, severe geopolitical pressure. I mean, we are literally seeing blockades and missile strikes disrupting the Red Sea right now.
It's happening as we speak.
What happens to the global balance of power if the center of world trade permanently shifts away from the oceans?
It's a huge question.
What if the future of the global economy looks less like the 20th century maritime empires built by the British and the Americans, and much more like the ancient overland Silk Roads of Central Asia?
If you control the INSTC, do you control the 21st century?
Exactly. It is a question that forces us to completely reframe how we think about geography itself.
The locked vol we talked about at the beginning might just become the center of the world.
It just might. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep questioning the maps you look at. We'll catch you next time.